and all their tricks think they're having a great time. I would call it the greatest acting job in the world. The last stage of prostitution is absolute despair, depression, depravity, lost. You're at this tunnel with no vision, dead end, and you're like, where do I go from here? I've wrecked my whole life. And you realize everything that you thought that you could make from prostitution was just all like a mirage. It's like you were chasing it, chasing it, chasing it, but you never came to it.
Advocates of prostitution often employ the term choice to imply that those who are working in the industry are free and empowered. And on the surface, we saw girls who appeared to have chosen this lifestyle. But the more that we listened to their stories, the more we began to see a pattern that preceded this so-called choice.
Why do you think so many of them are winding up in that situation?
I think it's because a lot of them have my type of background. I suppose, I mean, there must have been on 100 girls, probably more, about their past and everything, and like nearly all of them has been sexually abused. In fact, I can't think of one that hasn't.
Sexual abuse is probably one of the core factors for how a woman gets onto the streets in a position of being exploited, and that's across the world. Abuse is a phenomena where in the US we're looking at 1 out of every 3 women, 1 out of every 4 men. But in terms of prostitution, you're looking at 95% of the people who are in those exploited positions have a prior history of being violated.
One pimp actually said, you know, I have to thank those dads. They're the ones that started her out in her training. And I just picked up where the dad or the stepdad or the neighbor left off. There's a lot of truth in that, a great deal of truth in that. The sexual abuse of children in the United States and in every other country is a horror that most of us fail to acknowledge and address. And it's not a stranger in a trench coat on the playground. It's a family member or a friend who's doing the sexual abusing.
This guy was actually living with us, and I got raped when I was 10 in my own house, in my bed. I feel like, you know, if somebody's gonna take it, might as well just give it up. It changed my whole life when that happened, you know? Like, it's crazy how one event can make your whole life just crumble.
That's where the child is taught what she's worth, which is not much. That's where she's taught this is what she has to do in order to get the things all children want in life, which is love and affection.
When a young woman is abused in the context of her own family, and that could be in Nigeria, that could be in the United States, there is a sense of hopelessness and despair and shame that eventually brings a person to a point where they ultimately have no value for themselves and or for their body. As a consequence, they are so susceptible to the manipulation of others.
When I was about 5 years old, I was regularly abused by a family member who used to come home drunk, and often in a blackout he would get in bed with me thinking that I was my mother. When I was 14, a man offered me money, and I couldn't believe that somebody had actually paid for it when they could just take it from me, because I didn't think I owned my sexuality. I thought I was there for the taking, and for anybody to steal this from me was perfectly okay. And when somebody offered me money, I was like blown away. I mean, it wasn't a small amount of money, not to a 14-year-old, you know.
And that's how many children start in prostitution. The average age of entry into prostitution is 13 to 14 years in the US.
We came to the conclusion that there's really no way you can qualify a person's choice to enter prostitution when most have a background of sexual abuse and have entered prostitution underage. In most cases, from what we had seen, it wasn't so much an issue of girls choosing prostitution as it was prostitution choosing them.
Our attention really turned at this point to how do we put an end to this? In Amsterdam, the legal model of prostitution was promoted as ensuring healthier and safer working conditions for the girls. But that was hardly our experience in going there. However, in Sweden, we heard about a progressive form of legislation that was making great strides at eradicating sex trafficking there. Once we got to Sweden, we met up with Kasia Wahlberg, the nation's head detective combating trafficking.
Since 1999, the purchasing of sexual services is criminalized in Sweden. So this was the protection of acts, from acts of violence against women, actually. And also the thought that you will never reach equality between men and women, truly, as long as you have a subgroup of women that are being exploited sexually.
Swedish law on prostitution is aimed at stopping prostitution because they understand it to be a form of violence against women, and they are an abolitionist law. How does that law work that controls organized crime so incredibly well? They arrest men for buying sex, and the penalty is a serious one. It would be a U.S. felony level offense, or it would be an offense that warrants jail time.
We usually say that it's a human right not to be in prostitution and not to exploit and buy and sell people for sexual exploitation. Men must start to learn how to fulfill their sexual desires instead of exploiting another person, because prostitution is about men masturbating in women's bodies, nothing else.
Women in prostitution are not arrested. They're offered services for escape. And of course, pimps and traffickers are arrested. But they essentially create a very, very bad business environment for pimps and johns.
Traffickers and pimps, they complained when we wiretapped them. We overheard the telephone conversations that they would speak about Sweden as a bad market because the buyers were afraid of getting caught, and traffickers and pimps could not easily send women out to street prostitution because the police or social service or other women in prostitution, they would easily find out.
In Sweden, we found that protecting the sanctity of human life was more important to them than fostering the unbridled sexual appetites of men.
It has a social implication in terms of the way that people even view women in this case and value them. And it creates an atmosphere of safety, an atmosphere of dignity in the country. And so here it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We can walk freely through the streets, feeling no threat of danger. The last time that somebody was actually even murdered in prostitution in Sweden was 1989, which is over 20 years ago. Incredible.
Sweden has the lowest rate of trafficking in the European Union. If you want to stop trafficking, you must stop prostitution.
Sweden's model provided a ray of hope for us in terms of combating sex trafficking as an industry. But there was still this issue of girls left out there, girls still trapped in prostitution. And when we first embarked on our journey, we envisioned rescuing girls trapped in cages. But The issue of human trafficking was far more complex than we originally anticipated. And it seemed like every place that we went, the barricade confining girls in prostitution grew more and more impenetrable, from the government corruption and organized crime in Europe to the statelessness and poverty and parental complicity in Southeast Asia, to just the general psychological chains that bind girls in prostitution. Rescue efforts seemed to be a nearly impossible task.
In the last couple of years, 3 years actually, the anti-trafficking police, NGOs, 3 NGOs have worked in SWIPOC. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and they've rescued 1 girl. You know, people say education. If we just educate them, if we just get them good jobs, if we do development, well, hell, millions of dollars have been spent on both and the situation continues to get worse. I mean, what proof do we need? Does education and development solve evil in the West? I mean, what has that done? Nothing. We have all the evidence in the world that education and money does not get rid of evil. It isn't a money and education issue. It's a moral, it's a spiritual issue.
What we began to realize was even a greater challenge than rescuing the girls was restoring them once they've been rescued. In fact, we found that most girls, even after they've been rescued, still suffer with nightmares of their former life, which makes coping with everyday life pretty unbearable.
How many women do you know that have been brutally abused who never leave therapy? As a former pastor who did counseling, I can tell you most of the women continue in counseling the rest of their life. And they'll tell the story in detail and they'll talk about it. But really, you could change that word to faith. What they really believe doesn't change. And to really change that, it takes more than a counselor. It takes more than the words of a staff that's going to come alongside the girl and say, you're really good, this is good. Because remember, the world out there, the world they live in, are telling them they're trash.
What was really going on inside?
I hated myself. I hated myself so much, and I started to think that my mother was right about never accepting me like her daughter. That it wasn't worth it to live anymore. No, there's only one thing what it does. It destroys your body. It destroys your life. Your thoughts, your heart especially.
That's what you start to feel and truly, spiritually believe in your heart, that you are just a whore, that you're just a prostitute, that you're no good, that as soon as you get older, as soon as you get fat, as soon as there's a wrinkle on your forehead, that no one's gonna want you. And regardless of you getting paid, no money is worth the disgrace and the shame and the destruction that it does to a woman's heart and soul. It is devastating. Trust me.
I knew that there was something wrong. I felt almost subhuman, and I was very ashamed. I was frightened to tell anybody that I couldn't feel love, or I couldn't feel compassion or anything like that, you know, because I thought there was something wrong with me.
What was so tragic is that many of the girls who had been rescued were retreating back to prostitution just to regain a sense of normalcy.
Why a woman would choose to stay in a situation where she is being abused. Why is that? Even when they're offered alternatives, why would they choose to stay? And I've often said that the abuse that we know is sometimes better than the future that we don't know.
We know by the statistics that you take a girl out of prostitution, 96 out of 100 within a year are back in it, unless deep, profound care over a lengthy period of time is provided to be able to begin to restore that sense of dignity and future for that child.
I rather like not ever do it again, because I felt like every time I sold my body to somebody, I was like selling my soul. Like I was, every time I worked, it was just like, you know, a piece of me is going every single time, and I was tired of having that like empty feeling inside of my body, like inside of my body, you know, inside of my soul.
Let me tell you the story of one girl. For 2 months, every single day, this big, fat ex-Marine rapes this little 12-year-old girl. You know, she writes in her, she writes her story out. As part of our therapy, she writes her story out, and she says how worthless she knew she was then. She said, I know I'm just a piece of garbage, and my life is ruined. And why does he do this to me? Why would he do this to me? The hopelessness is just like, it's such a weak word. Such a weak word for what she feels. It's beyond hopeless to, did you ever feel guilty about something you've done? Right, you never, and maybe sometime I felt really guilty before. Well, if you can imagine the worst you've ever felt for something, the very worst, multiply it by 10 and live like that for a year or two. Every day, feeling that pain and thinking that's what you're worth, that's what your life is, and not understanding how this could happen to you. How could this happen to me?
What type of emotions do you feel were you experiencing at that time?
Intense fear. Intense fear. Of real rejection, of feeling totally unloved, unwanted, uncared for. I just felt totally lost within myself.
And so that's when the heavy, heavy cocaine abuse came in. And I just wanted to disappear. I remember just lighting that pipe and just looking forward to that hit. All of a sudden I heard my ears just ringing really loud. And like everything went black. Like my eyes just shut down. My eyes were wide open, but went black, and I fell back. And I was having a heart attack. The pain in my chest was like, my heart was going, and it was like, I felt like somebody was stabbing me with a knife in my heart. But I couldn't see anything, and all I could remember was that, there was nothing but blackness around me. And just, I realized, crap, I'm dying. I'm dying, and all I could remember is Jesus. That's all I could think about was God. And I saw my life literally flash before my eyes. And as I called him on his name, I just said, Jesus, Jesus, I'm alone. I'm sorry. Come and get me. Save me from myself. I'm sorry. And all I could do was like say sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was a prostitute. I was so ashamed. And the ambulance came. They took me in the hospital, and the doctor came over and said, do you know how lucky you are? You have a lot of drugs in your system, lady, and you're allergic to narcotics. And he's like, God's with you. And I knew that Jesus heard my prayer.
I was in such despair and desperation. I would really cry out to God, And then one night, he appeared to me in a dream. I would go into this beautiful garden, and sat on the bench was the Lord Jesus. And I would go to him, we would sit, and we would just talk about, I don't even know what we spoke about, but he never, ever once condemned me.
I said, Jesus, I just want to see you. I want to know what you look like. I don't care about the movies I've seen. I just want to see you. I want to talk to you. I want to see you. And so he granted my request. I had a dream with him one night. And he came to me, and he didn't look anything like any picture, any person I've ever seen before. He was the most handsome man I've ever seen. Beautiful. And he came to me and went this close to my face and looked into my eyes and read me from a baby until my perfect age that I was. Everything I've done. Didn't say a word to me and looked at me with love in his eyes like, I love you.
There was such beauty and such love that emanated from him. I fell at his feet. I was like a dead person. And believe me, at that particular point in my life, I wasn't scared of much, but I was, and it wasn't like a fear was going to hit me. It was like who he was, who he really is. And I fell at his feet, and I just cried, and I said, Lord, I'm so sorry for what I've done. And when I got up, he'd say, Helena, I'll pray for you. And it was so beautiful, so gentle. So gentle. And that went on for about 6 months. I was always waiting for him to say a harsh word or condemn me. He didn't.
He said, I love you. You're healed, you're whole, you're delivered. And just like this fire was lit in me. And I just started to weep. And I just realized, God loves me. No matter what I've done, no matter all the mistakes I've made, no matter how many people I've hurt, he still loves me. And he can make something of my life.
To think he took me, I was nothing. When he found me, I was laying in bed. I hadn't had a bath for a year. I was covered in abscesses where I'd skin pop stuff, I'd missed veins, I'd cut myself. I was stinky, I was smelly, I was rotten. And he took me and he made me something beautiful. And to me, that is so wonderful. That is so worth giving my life to. And I just think he is so wonderful. And I don't want to stop talking about him because my heart just fills with joy. And I just want everybody to know about him, you know? I mean, it's just amazing.
Ricky loves you.
I know he loves me. Yeah. Yeah, I know he loves me. And it's real.
He's jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I'm a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. And all of a sudden, I'm unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory. And I realize just how beautiful you are, how great your affections are for me.
It's a happy ending to the story. Okay, she gets rescued. She comes to us. And she begins to realize that she is a child of God, that she's a princess, the daughter of the king. When she finished her therapy, she said, she goes, now I know the truth about me. God loves me, and I have so many people here who love me, that there must be something good about me, and I know that if I just try hard, I will have a great future. That God will give me a great future no matter what happened in my past.
เป็นชีวิตและเป็นความจริงและเป็นความรักที่มั่นคงเป็นความรักที่บริสุทธิ์ความรักที่หาที่ไหนไม่ได้แล้ว
Mình em bỏ khai nhưng mà lúc đã lại nhau mà đã tiên thay lại khlam tiên cứ đã chìm chặt lại nhau nhưng mà làm tha không có khai như thế
made it possible for me to get out of this world. He's loving me, even though I was selling my body, even though I was destroying my body, as many times as I could do at that moment. But his love is so unconditional, and he still loves me every day.
Он устроил вот такую вот встречу, чтобы я встретилась с мамой, и он мне помог. И я верю в то, что действительно Бог есть, Он существует, и я знаю, что Он любит нас.
I'm ashamed that I used to be a person like that. I can't even call myself a person. It's sad. It's really, really sad. But God is bigger than that. I was captive of one thing, she was a captive of another thing. But God wants to set the captives free.
Having reached the end of our journey, it became very clear that a new one was just beginning. Our eyes have been opened to our world in a way we have never seen it before. The people we met, the faces we saw, and the stories we heard have made us different and changed the course of our lives. We have been struck with a wound that we pray we never recover from. Famous abolitionist William Wilberforce once said, "If to be feeling alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, then I am one of the most incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large." In addition to his tireless legislative work, we looked at 3 things Wilberforce did that were so effective at combating slavery. Number 1 is prayer. He understood slavery to be a spiritual battle, and he paved the way for abolition through prayer. The second thing was awareness. He thrust the injustice of slavery into the conscience of a nation. Third, he gave money. He was a generous financial supporter of the efforts to combat slavery. The crisis of modern-day sex slavery does not need interested observers. It needs incurable fanatics.